There we go. We are live. Perfect. All right, ladies and gentlemen, good evening, good evening, good evening. It is Saturday, June 15th. Happy Father's Day Eve. I myself am just getting back from some Father's Day shenanigans. And just as I promised you guys, moving into hurricane season, if things pop up and things get going, things look a little interesting out there, we were going to do some erroneous content, some erroneous updates, and here we are. It is 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Not our regularly scheduled program. We have some up-and-comings out there in the tropics, not only in terms of the Gulf of Mexico. We don't want to shift gears that heavily because we are still looking at some fairly anomalous factors out there with not one but potentially two different low-pressure centers that could develop somewhere around our Central American gyre near the Yucatan Peninsula, make a potential run towards Louisiana and Texas, maybe the east shorelines of Mexico. But we also have a new area that has been up-and-coming over the last, I'll say, only 18 to 24 hours. For those of you who've been tuning in for our routine live streams over the last several days or over the last couple of sessions, we've mentioned that there's been a little whisper of some kind of a weird feature trying to develop and organize and push towards the southeast. Well, today we definitely saw a little bit more action, if you will. And without further ado, we'll take a look. So this is our latest National Hurricane Center outlook. We still have our disturbed area of weather associated with the gyre out there, the MJO propagating across Central America and the western side of the Atlantic. So 50 percentile, if I'm not mistaken, we're still 0 for 50. Oh no, 0 for 60. Pardon me. So we have seen a little bit of an increase as well, 0 for 60 out there in the Bay of Campeche. And then we have this bad boy right here. This has definitely been up and coming. It's been on a few of our radars. We've been talking about it. We talked about it yesterday. And very interesting that, hey, what do you know? We have an NHC designation with it now, 0 for 20. 48-hour chances of development, 0%. 7 days, we got a 20% chance. That's like the token 0-20 ratio there. I'm really a fan of this designation here. I'm a fan of the track because some of our models do want to take it up towards the Florida-Georgia state line. Other models like the Icon, even the UK Met to an extent, want to take it a little bit further towards the south, kind of the whereabouts, the Vero Beach, just to the south of the Cocoa Beach, Melbourne area, the Space Coast. Patrick's Space Force Base is apparently what it's called right now. So we're definitely going to keep an eye on it, and we're going to dive right in. We'll say hello to a few folks. We'll treat this as a ordinary live stream. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see who we got. Alex, Nomad Avenue 6, Zachary, Robbie Lynn, Scrooge McDuck. Good to see you in the chat. We're going to be looking at the UK model, Scrooge. I'm going to let you know right now. Gary, Chris, Skinny Bean, Joseph, My Mind Over Your Matter, Corey, One Nation Weather. Good to see you, my man. Judy, Isaac, Daniel, Malachi, welcome back. Good to see you in there. TRG as well. Good evening. Good to see you in there, my friend. Smoke and Swamp Outdoors, Skinny, Isaac, Mike Murad, good to see you, buddy. PM, hello there. Nomad Avenue 6, Daniel Lawson, Dallin Moore, welcome in, everybody. I honestly didn't think I was going to get this many people to jump in. I honestly more or less wanted to just jump onto the YouTube platform just to get something out there in open air. This is going to be as ab-libbed as we've probably been on this channel in quite some time, just because this is all happening fairly rapidly. Richard Perez over on X, he had commented on a post that I had shared, and he said, is it just me, or is this happening fairly quickly? Yeah, definitely. We have about 5 days, give or take, to get ahead of this and see exactly what's going to take place. So going back over to the infrared satellite shot, this here is what is possibly going to help to develop whatever that thing is. We're not going to go as far as calling it tropical storm or anything like that, but our models have suddenly come together with some pretty good convergence on something developing out there and pushing towards the Florida coastline, whether it be up towards the north, towards Palm Bay, Jacksonville, wiggling around the DeLand, Daytona Beach area, or down towards the Vero Beach, Boca Raton area almost, it looks like. And then our gyre is kicking up the European model, the GFS, the Canadian model. A lot of our models, we can't, like I said, forget about putting emphasis on Central America. Every single one of our model platforms have come back aboard the 2 cyclone iteration. So you never know. We could be looking at Alberto. We could be looking at Alberto Barrow. We could be looking at Alberto Barrow. What is it? Colin is the name, the third name, Colin. You never know. We could try to make a run for it. We're not going to go that far into the weeds and talk about it too much. So let's get into the data. So 12 Zulu today was a huge change. And in fact, let me paint the picture for you. Let's go back to the European model. We'll go back a number of runs just so we can talk previously about when we first discovered this. So I believe it was our Monday iteration here. If you guys take a look, there goes AL90, and then the European model had a little whisper of some kind of a weak wave right in through here, developing off the east coast of the southeast, the Carolinas, etc. You fast forward to Wednesday. This was, I believe, when we only had a little bit of ensemble support, though. Not a whole lot. Chris, thank you. Chris is the seed name. I appreciate you guys. If we fast forward to 12Z on Wednesday, and we go through that same period of time, there goes AL90. The 12Z European model had a little something in the pattern there. Let me go back to 0Z. I think maybe it was 0Z on Wednesday. We had a little bit more of something in the pattern that the European model, there it is, right there. So European model had a weak disturbance, picking up, dumping some rain on the Bahamas as we got our Central American gyre system. Tries to organize something over the Gulf Stream, but never really quite cuts it, never really quite gets to that point. 0Z on Thursday, I think, dropped it. Yeah, it had dropped it. We didn't have much hope for anything out there. And then all of a sudden at 0Z this morning, we've brought it back. We brought it back this morning on 0Z. You can see actual closed low pushing in towards the Jacksonville area. Still nothing all that impressive. And then at 12 Zulu, once again, we have that good run-to-run consistency. 12Z closing off the isobars, kind of bringing in a closed level of cyclonic spinach in the atmosphere right there to the southeast corner of Florida. Nothing too crazy, nothing overly concerning, but definitely has far more of that tropical look, if you ask me, than anything we've seen so far. If you look down over the Central American area, notice how broad this vorticity is, just an enormous area of cyclonic spin in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. In comparison to that thing that moves over the Bahamas, this looks far more tropical. Far more tropical, and that's something I've identified for a couple of days now. All of our other models are picking up on it. Let's go ahead and switch gears. We'll go over to the GFS. So we'll go back in time, and we'll start off on Wednesday at 0Z. We'll very quickly go through the model run. Nada, just some phantom hurt. Actually, I missed this. I didn't even notice this. Wow. This was on 0Z on the 12th. I never even saw that. So that's a phantom storm right there, a la the GFS. Nothing. We'll go to 12Z yesterday. Scroll through time, nothing out there, nothing whatsoever. Another phantom storm coming out of the Caribbean, possible African easterly wave right there in the Gulf of Mexico developing. And then finally today, out of left field, out of nowhere, look at that, bam. GFS has jumped aboard the European model train and now has a tropical storm pushing right in towards the Georgia-Florida state line. If we come over to 18 Zulu, believe it or not, it is still there, albeit just a hint, a whisper. A hair worth down closer to the south. 1,001 millibar tropical storm pushing in. Fairly consolidated, fairly small buzzsaw-looking tropical feature here. More than likely thanks to a lot of the dry air that's out there. There is going to be a lot of dry air that could influence this system. Let's go to 700 to 300 millibar relative humidity. You can see that there is going to be some dry air, but this is a bona fide tropical signal here. 110%. I can say that much with a very good vote of confidence. If we go back in time and take a look at, for example, AL90, let's go up the east coast of the United States and we'll transition back to, let's go to 12Z on Sunday and look at AL90 as it moves up the coastline. So if you look at AL90 as it moves up, first of all, we don't even see it here. That's the funny part. Let me use the European model, because I know the European model had been favoring it for a little while. Let's go back to 12Z on Tuesday and take a look at AL90. As AL90 moves up the coast, notice here that as that low pressure tries to develop, we have our low center displaced off towards the west of all of our moisture. This is looking very frontal. So you see all this dry, cool advection occurring on the backside of it. This is why I was so upset about Ophelia last hurricane season, because Ophelia really did not look very tropical. It definitely looked subtropical. There were some instances as it made landfall into North Carolina, Virginia, where you saw some thunderstorm activity popping up as it moved over the Gulf Stream. Yeah, I'll give it credit for that. But I still think we messed up the classification of Ophelia last hurricane season. Even right here where the European model kind of favors it a little bit more, notice how this just looks genuinely frontal by nature. You have a pressure trough off towards the north indicating what could be a warm front right there. This looks very cold frontal boundary. You got all your moist air advection occurring along the leading edge, that warm conveyor, as we would like to say during our severe weather season, but then just enormous backing in the winds just upstream of it. Look at all that dry air advection moving in off the United States. Very, very textbook baroclinic jet-supported system, so not a big fan of it. If we switch back over to the GFS and take a look at this new system down there over the deep south, much different. See that? Very different system. Very different system. Totally different, night and day difference. If you look, 110% consolidated. We're wrapped around, very symmetrical looking, even with this dry air. This is what you want to see. This is why for my folks out there who mentioned that the dusty air out there from the Saharan air layer could possibly ruin our hurricane season, that's why that's hit or miss. It's not something you want to put all your eggs in a basket with, because notice here what the GFS is thinking, and the reason we're using the GFS here is because this is very short distance. We're not anywhere near La La Land. This is only 114 hours out. We're looking at possible development as early as maybe 2 to 3 days from now. Right there, it really begins to develop, and this is only Tuesday. Today is Saturday. We're rolling quickly into Sunday, so we have about 3 to 4 days to see exactly what takes shape. And even right then, early on in the run, if you look, massively different signal. Massively different signal. It is very well stacked, very well consolidated. It has a nice spherical nature or symmetrical moisture bubble around it. It's sealing itself off, and I believe we've talked about that a few times on earlier live streams. If we get these tropical cyclones, these barotropic warm core lows to vertically stack in an area of low wind shear, it'll shield itself off. It'll prevent itself from really ingesting a lot of dry air, and in this case, that's kind of what we're seeing. Forgive me, we're going to kind of run through it very quickly because this is, like I said, a very ab-libbed briefing here. I don't have very much pulled up. I kind of was pulling things up on the fly. For Scrooge McDuck in the chat, here's the UK model. I wanted to look at the UK model because it wasn't in earlier when I had taken a look at it. A UK model doesn't really give a huge vote of confidence to the gyre, possibly that secondary system flaring up out there in the southwestern Gulf of Mexico, the Bay of Campeche. But then take a look over the Bahamas. Even the UK model has something spinning in and trying to consolidate as it moves over the Gulf Stream. A little bit of a different iteration here. This would suggest that our upper ridge over the eastern United States that's going to help to bring on that huge warm onslaught weakens and allows it to transition up the east coast like so, almost doing a Dorian-style move right there, kind of strengthening down just a little bit more before moving into Georgia and the Carolinas. So the Carolinas are under the threshold for some possible impacts, according to the UK model at 12Z. We switch on over to the Korean model just for shoots and giggles, and the Korean model has something out there as well at 12 Zulu. The Korean model is pretty well in line with the rest of our models. Even though we don't use this model fairly often, we can see our gyre system, very broad area of low pressure, forming up out there in the western Gulf of Mexico, and then look over the Bahamas. You got that area of low pressure that moves in. KMA kind of following in the footsteps of the UK model, closes off a low pressure area and then pushes it towards the Carolinas. So we are in a very, very split difference here. But if we very quickly come on over to the European model, once again, we look at the bona fide European model. In fact, I'll switch the AOI. We'll go to the southeastern United States, and we'll look at it up close. We'll use our wind model here. This is not a good wind model. Excuse me, let's switch that because that doesn't have our streamlines on it. I want the streamlines. Let me get the streamlines so we can see a 10-meter wind. There we go. We've got our streamlines on right there. You track it through time, and there she goes right there, closing off entirely, becoming an actual organized system with about 35, 40 knots of wind along its leading edge. And these are the gusts. Oh, no, these are sustained winds. So could be looking at a tropical depression, very low-end tropical storm. We'll have to give it a little bit more time. I know we're jumping on the live stream tonight and talking about it, but that's just because we don't have a lot of time to get ahead of it. We don't really have that desired lead time of, oh, yeah, it's way out there in the Atlantic off of the coast of Africa. We have about 10 to 14 days. No, like I said, guys, models are thinking development could start to begin within the next 72 hours. So we only have about 3 days to really analyze exactly what's going to happen before we possibly put out the tropical storm watches and so on and so forth. European model is very sold that the east coast of Florida is what's going to see it. And then what's very interesting about the 12Z Euro model is if you look, it goes right across the state of Florida, maintains its intensity, and if you look, it's moving fairly quickly. I had mentioned to my relatives we were spending time with earlier today for Father's Day, I told them this could look like a Charlie 2.0, not in terms of intensity, not in terms of strength. Please don't take that and confuse it or twist it or think I'm really hyping this up. I'm not saying a Charlie in terms of major hurricane, but what I'm saying is, and I want to emphasize this, Charlie hit Florida back in 2004 and just ripped across the state. It had weakened down to a Category 2, borderline Category 1 by the time it was moving up towards the Daytona Beach area because he was moving so fast. Hurricane Ian, on the other hand, by the time it really played a role in Central Florida's weather, he had gone from a borderline Cat 5 to a tropical storm. So that's the big difference. And in this case, if you look, the European model at 120 hours, 12Z, as we're starting a day on Thursday, is coming on shore down there over near Fort Lauderdale, Boca Raton, and at 126 hours and 6 hours, we're already past Lake Okeechobee, and then at 132 hours and 12 hours, we're already off the West Coast. So it's moving fast, and that's the big thing I want to emphasize with everything that comes towards Florida at this type of an angle. The peninsula is very narrow. So with that being said, if we have something that does want to rip in from the east coast out over the subtropical or the lower tropical or the upper tropical Atlantic, and it's moving at like a nice 15 to 18 knots westerly, it's going to move quickly over the peninsula and not have very much time to weaken. So let's say, for instance, hypothetically, we do get Tropical Storm X. We don't know if it's going to be Alberto or whoever. We'll just say Tropical Storm so-and-so. If it makes landfall and blasts through the state within a 10 to 12-hour window, that's like a normal workday, guys. Think about it. Put it into perspective. That's moving at a fairly decent click. We could still have Tropical Storm, if not Tropical Depression X, on the opposite side. Now, granted, obviously, you're not going to have as cataclysmic of impacts because it's a very weak storm, but this could translate over to other things. Let's say, for instance, this is like Hurricane Ian, hypothetically, coming on the East Coast, moving at a rapid pace. We're going to have major Hurricane Ian on the East Coast and possibly borderline major Hurricane Ian on the West Coast because you only have, I'm not too sure what the exact mileage is, but I don't think the peninsula is any more than 200 to 300 miles wide. It's not very wide. It only takes about 3.5 hours with or without traffic to go from Tampa to Melbourne. So it's not that long. But anyways, no, that's neither here nor there. One interesting feature about the 12Z Euro is if you look, it keeps it closed, closes it off a little bit more, moving to the Gulf, and then it makes a run towards Biloxi, the New Orleans area, and then crashes ashore and finally disappears. So very interesting. And off to the left-hand side of the chart, if you look, there's that secondary gyre system. We'll zoom back out again. We'll go back to the Caribbean AOI. Or actually, we'll go to the Gulf of Mexico. Let's use the Gulf of Mexico this time. Central America, Gulf of Mexico. There we go. So we can track. There goes our first gyre system right there, looking very rough. Very rough. There goes our next bad boy crashing into the southeast coast of Florida. Maintains its intensity, and as it's getting ready to move ashore near New Orleans, that's when all of a sudden we get our secondary system right there coming up out of the Bay of Campeche and moving in towards Texas, Louisiana as well. So we shall see. We'll definitely see. Definitely very interesting up-and-comings. And we're using the Euro. We're leaning on the Euro because everyone loves to swear by this model. In this case, I got to give the GFS credit where credit is due because we are definitely well within the window to where we're not just seeing rogue, anomalous features here. This is definitely a very realistic depiction here. Very realistic. Because if you look right there, we're already seeing development, consolidation at 54 hours. 54 hours. So this is going to happen very quickly. This is the genuine problem with these homegrown systems as well. Anything homegrown is going to come at you very fast. And it'll be interesting to see what we wake up to tomorrow at 0Z. Because if you look, the icon at 18 Zulu has a little low pressure there. Doesn't get as excited as the European model, but we're starting to see a little bit more convergence. And the icon actually brought back our BOC system as well. So definitely a good amount of activity for this time of year. We turned on the switch. It is June 15th, and here we are. I posted it on my Instagram, my my TikTok very quickly. I did the classic, here we go. We got a number of areas to watch. Let's talk steering now really fast. Let's talk steering, and then I'll open up the floor to questions for a little bit. So truthfully, this is going to be, I'm laughing sarcastically, this is going to be a very, very easy forecast. Extremely easy forecast. There you have it. So this is why I think the models are suddenly picking up on producing that system down there. Why our models are finally waking up that, hey, this energy could possibly come together. Because we have a giant mid-amplitude, almost sharp amplitude ridge that's going to push all the way up into eastern Atlantic Canada, getting all the way up towards the James Hudson Bay area, Quebec, Ontario, smothering the Great Lakes, really heating up the Northeast. Get ready for a pretty intense heat wave up there. If we go to our anomalies, just look at that. Very hot up there. Very hot up there. And then what's also interesting, I've been talking on the tropical chat a little bit. Some folks are speculating that we could possibly see this work in our, well, not in our favor, but work in terms of tropical favor. the fact that we have some mid to upper level cooler anomalies out here. The water temps out there are right where they need to be, 27-ish, 28 degrees Celsius. Definitely checks the box for tropical development. Obviously, the ocean heat content is, decent. Not looking at anything crazy. This is definitely not going to become a hurricane. That's for dang certain. We're not going to go into that realm. But the fact that we have mid to upper level cooler air could actually help to increase convection with it. Because if you guys think about it, cold over warm is not good. That's going to end up creating some turbulent mixing. It's kind of how we get our generalized thunderstorms over the inland areas. You have the warm air down at the surface. It creates your cape. It rises. In this case, more or less the same concept. You have your hot water, warm barotropic system down in the low mid levels, and then above it you got the cool dry air, so obviously that's going to help to enhance your thunderstorm complexes. So some of us are actually speculating that might actually help to circulate it, close it off, prevent that dry air from just eating it alive. But yeah, looking at the upper level pattern here, the 500 heights, this is definitely a straightforward forecast. That's why, truthfully, I see what the models are doing, that maybe the ridge will break down and weaken, but just looking at how much it broadens out, this is going to be a dead-on forecast. This is 100% a Florida landfall. This is like a Katrina, Rita, Andrew, what was her name? Someone just said in the chat, a Nicole, bona fide Florida landfall here, if not maybe a Georgia kind of impact. You have a very, very large anticyclone here just driving everything off towards the west. So that's going to be, it's a dominant ridge too. Look at that. We're almost at a 600 total decameters up there at 500 millibars. So very powerful ridge axes. And this ridge as well is going to help to give us a little bit of that wiggle room, enough wiggle room to where our shear is not going to be as hefty on that storm. If you look at that, it's like right in the sweet spot. That's another thing too. If you look, we're in between features. So that thing it's ready to rock and roll. It has its own little outflow boundary. You can see the outflow being picked up by the GFS. So it's kind of game on. It's definitely game on. We're looking fairly favorable. We're not going to get too overexcited yet. We have our official sources bullseyeing it. Hopefully we get something over the next 48 hours and we can designate this as an invest and get our hurricane models on it. That'll be really, really interesting to see. But all right, let's get some questions going. We got a lot of folks in the chat. I salute everybody for tuning in for a late live stream. This is one of our erroneous live streams. This is what I promised you guys. For my faithful viewers and for anyone new who may be tuning in, I got you guys. I told you, I gave you my word that when things get busy, regardless of the time, we're going to be here. We're going to be here talking, and we're going to be getting you ahead of the storm. So definitely some interesting up-and-comings. Please ask any questions you guys have. Let's see. Twilight Firefly, welcome in. PM, welcome in. I think I said hello to you already. Sharon, hello. Bass Bashin. Space Coast, Florida here. What do you think is going to happen here? So, Bass Bashin, Bass Bash, I see your channel name or your picture and I see a fish. I'm assuming it's bass, not base. It's still, believe it or not, too early to tell. I think our ceiling here would be maybe a low to mid-grade tropical storm. So nothing, really extravagant. It's not like this is going to be a Nicole or, God forbid, anything stronger than that. This isn't going to be a Katrina Rita situation. But in terms of climatology, we are definitely looking at where a named storm could be. In fact, this is a little bit more favorable than our Central American gyre area just because of how weird and complex that pattern has been. This is going to be a bit more of like your traditional tropical cyclone right there. If you look, it plops out right into an area of very favorable winds in the mid to upper levels, kind of does its thing, and then crosses right up into where our Central American anticyclone could potentially try to wear it down. But by the time it actually makes landfall into Florida, if it does, or anywhere along the southeast coastline, our shear is only going to activate after it has come ashore. So as it moves in, we should be able to see it fairly, kind of just do its thing, left to its own devices. We're not going to have any major inhibitors because of that big old ridge to its north. The ridge here is what's going to help us out. It's going to give it if Mick and Marley are in the chat, it's going to give it that extra nudge to keep the wind shear out of its path. Mike, welcome in. I was just talking about you. Naz, what are your thoughts on this being a storm for both of us? It's very possible, because to tell you the truth, we'll just switch on over to the water temps. We'll go over to the water temps since wind shear at this point in time is not a very, very huge issue. If you look, whereabouts it originates, we're sitting pretty in that like right optimal threshold. We're not really hot, we're not too cold. We're outside of that subtropical cold pool that has been showing up and giving us that distinct horseshoe shape on a lot of our charts leading up to the hurricane season, where we will really need to investigate. Let's say, for instance, if this forecast verifies and we do have a closed low pressure moving in. Depending on its forward progress, history has proven to us that if there's going to be any sudden bump in its intensification, it's going to be for my Armageddon fans out there, it's going to be within that area that I like to call zero barrier. If you guys have watched the Bruce Willis, Ben Affleck film way back in the day, I don't want to close, Armageddon. I call that zero barrier for our East Coast storms because you got the Gulf Stream there, and the Gulf Stream just suddenly jumps up a good 3 degrees in temperature on average. And if this thing is moving in slow enough, like we saw with Nicole last year, Nicole was not expected to be a hurricane, and then all of a sudden she hit that Gulf Stream, boom, Hurricane Nicole, 75-mile-an-hour hurricane making landfall along the East Coast. So if it does manage to close up and go full buzzsaw, tiny compact cyclone out there, low pressure area as it moves towards the Bahamas. Once it hits zero barrier, that's when things are going to get a little bit more interesting. We could see a little bit of increased convection, could see our tornado risk go up, could see our coastal waterspout risk go up, could see our coastal flooding go up because those rain bands are going to pack a little bit more of a punch, rain rates are going to be higher, or altogether, if the system has optimal forward speed, 13 to 15 knots, we could see a little bit of intensification in it. This has just been proven to us. That's not hype. It's not me trying to get a stronger storm. We've seen it, guys. These storms, when they get along the coast, that continental shelf water on either side of Florida, we've seen it countless numbers of times. Storms will intensify in that last split second. That's why I say zero barrier. We're all bracing for landfall, and then all of a sudden the update comes out when it's 25 miles offshore, and we saw a jump in 10, 15 mile an hour in winds, and central pressure suddenly dropped. So that'll be very interesting, Mike. And to get into your question, if it does survive the trip over Florida, heck yeah, it's going to be into even greater temps, greater ocean heat content. So if that puppy can last its way, if it even organizes, again, we're still shooting in the dark. It's only day one of this convergence in our model data. But just to answer your question, if it can hold true and steadily move across the Florida Peninsula and exit out over the West Coast, yeah, I could see a little bit of re-intensification, especially if the wind shear remains optimal and all that gyre moisture is not going to be an issue. It's going to have lots of moisture on the West Coast as opposed to the East Coast to work with. So it could definitely still be a weather player for your neck of the woods out there in southeast Louisiana. So definitely an excellent question. Excellent question. Where do you think it'll hit Florida? Joshua's workout. That's going to be a tough one. I definitely do think the Florida East Coast is going to be our most susceptible area. Don't really see that ridge breaking down. Let's go back over to our model data. We'll go back over to the Euro, and we'll take a look at the EPS. We'll take a look at the actual European ensemble, and we'll take a look at our height anomalies and see what the Euro is thinking at 12 Zulu. So here comes our big old ridge, and oh yeah, nah. It's definitely going to be a Florida issue, that's for certain. The ridge comes in, really intensifies thanks to that negative PNA along the West Coast. You see that deep trough digging in over the Rockies. That's going to help to really bump up the amplitude of this ridge, which means it's going to kind of become a bit of a blocking ridge. In fact, I would almost say this is almost a blocking ridge, with as anomalous as it is in the heights over Quebec and the northeast United States. And what that means is more meridional pattern. These things are not going to move very fast. If this was a low amplitude ridge, a broad amplitude ridge, it would scoot out into the Atlantic very quickly, and that'll open up an instance of trying to move up the mid-Atlantic coastline. But with that thing becoming as blocking of a ridge as it's expected to become right there, all the way through to Friday and into Saturday, it finally broadens out. Anything along its southern periphery is just going to want to shoot west. So it's still very early to determine exactly where it is likely to push towards Florida, but at this point in time, this is a pretty solid forecast. This is a pretty easy forecast for my friends out there who want to get into tropical analysis and tropical forecasting. This is an easy one. There's not a whole lot of moving pieces here. We are more or less set up for success in terms of if we get a named storm or just something out there, we know more or less where it's going to push. We don't have to worry about troughs, fronts, wind shear, other low pressures. It's just going to move west. Got that big old blocker, as Brian Shields likes to say, the blocker up to its north. It's not going to go anywhere else but west. I noticed at 12Z today, we saw a huge jump in our tropical depression probabilities. Look at that, all the way up to about 50%, right off the Vero Beach, not the Punta Gorda area, for once, off the, losing my train of thought, Boca Raton area. Let's see, I got a lot of questions in the chat. A lot of people in the chat tonight, guys. I applaud you for joining in. I really appreciate it. It's headed opposite a typical trajectory, although it isn't too abnormal since the ridge is steering. Yeah, it is heading opposite direction, I will say. I definitely agree with you there, One Nation Weather, because typically, climatologically speaking, we're either seeing this, or this. So this is kind of, if I were to change the ink, this is kind of erroneous. But then again, we have a very anomalous ridge out there up over the northeast United States. So that's going to help to drive everything in towards the west. It's helping us, but at the same time, it's hurting us. Right now, the way I would consider this, guys, given this isn't going to be a hurricane or anything to really worry about, there's not going to be any evacuations and whatnot, I would honestly take this as a bit of a blessing. You know, Invest 90L brought some very disastrous flooding to southern Florida, but that's because southern Florida has really just been getting wrecked in terms of heavy rainfall. Northern Florida and the the Panhandle has gotten their fair share, but central and northern Florida desperately needs some rain. And in this case, looking at a fairly weak system, tropical depression, tropical storm, low-end, mid-grade tropical storm, yeah, it'll be a little bit of a sporty event, get a little beach erosion, some storm surge, but it's not anything to really write home about. This is, I guess you could say, a pretty decent season opener. Let's put it that way. If we don't, I mean, you can see the probabilities out there in the Gulf are pretty high. That's maxing out at the 90-95 percentile right there that something's going to form. So very good agreement out there in the western Gulf of Mexico. But either way, either side of the spectrum, this is a solid season opener. For our folks out there who are trying to cancel the season, if this does come to fruition, that's what I would consider. This is like hurricane season open for business. Here, like with the classic thumbnails with the big arrows. Here we go. So you can see we have progressively upped our tropical depression probabilities. And what I thought was very interesting as well is if you switch over to the tropical storm probabilities, pretty nice signal here over the Bay of Campeche, the western Gulf of Mexico. We're at about that 50-60 percentile here. And if you look over Florida, you know, we got a little bit of the gray blobage out there indicating that there is a very low-end chance this thing spins up into a tropical storm. I can confidently say, guys, that is probably our ceiling here. Definitely our ceiling here. I would not, if you see anybody out there talking hurricane, absolutely not. They're definitely out to lunch on that. Definitely do not see that being a hurricane. If we do close it off, it'll definitely be a nice-looking tropical storm. You can see our European ensembles here really starting to amp up out there over Florida. This is for 18Z. At 12Z, you see much of the same. In fact, we kind of went up a little bit. That was 12Z. Let's go back to 0Z, 0Z. And you can also see here as well, very good trending in the models. Earlier on, it was looking more like a South Carolina, Georgia issue. And as we've gone through the day today from 15 to 18 Zulu, look at how we're starting to see a lot of that good convergence right there, just pointed at the east coast of Florida. A couple of rogue members still going up towards the northwest. I really don't think that's going to happen, though. I really don't. Just looking at the way the pattern is situated, that gigantic ridge, that sharp, well, we'll call it a mid-amplitude ridge. You could see it in the pattern here, even with the area in the Gulf. Everything's just going to get bullied off towards the west and northwest. So this is definitely going to be a Florida event, whatever the case may be, whatever it does to try to conjure up into. What else was I going to show you guys? Oh, you know what? As a matter of fact, just for fun, let's see if it shows up on our NAM model. I know the NAM is absolutely horrible. Don't buy into this whatsoever, guys. Don't use the NAM to forecast for hurricanes, but I'm curious because this goes out 86 hours. So let's see if it actually shows up on the NAM. Hey, yeah, look at that. The NAM has it. The NAM's got a little area of low pressure down there near the Bahamas, and it also has our gyre storm down there in the Bay of Campeche. So our not-so-stellar models are definitely picking up on something. It's, you know, kind of just a little bit of evidence on the table. There you have it. So even the North American model, the NAM out there, is picking up on a little shindig growing in off the Bahamas and down there in the Bay of Campeche. Let's see, who else do we have questions from? I'm so sorry I haven't been able to look at the chat. There's a lot of folks in here tonight. Welcome in. Awesome to have you guys. Well, let me see. Let's see. Do we have questions in here? Thanks for the thumbnail idea, Nazario. Yeah, you're very welcome. Cancel the season. What's up, my brother? Hope all is well. And yeah, that is Richard Perez. Good to see you. Good to see you. It'll be a wake-up call for the rest of the season. Yeah, definitely. Definitely a wake-up call. Pat is calling for hurricane conditions likely. Do you know who that is? I do. And I don't buy that. I feel bad. I don't want to throw. I'm not even going to say I feel bad. I'm not throwing shade. I'm just being honest. Anybody out there who forecasts a hurricane, I don't see it with either of these systems, with either of them. Our gyre has been a very difficult forecast, very erroneous still. Our confidence is still not at 100%. For me personally, I'm about like a 70-75% chance we get a named system out of that, let alone a hurricane. I really don't foresee either of these bad boys being a hurricane at all. Even if we have the favorable wind shear and the temperatures, I don't see that happening. That's getting into a little bit of unrealistic territory and allowing the excitement of this hyperactive hurricane season to swallow us whole, and we're not going to do that. If you look over here at the European model, the Euro actually has us in that sweet spot right there. If you look, system kind of rides in with a bit of a weak trough axis that disintegrates the wind shear out there and can carry it through. And in fact, look at how the wind shear opens up and becomes even more favorable as that system moves into the Gulf of Mexico. So, Mike, to circle back to your question, it almost seems like our upper level wind shear is going to back off enough to where we could see this, whatever it comes together as, continue to trek through and become a dual weather player, like a Katrina Rita 2.0. Not a major hurricane. I say that loosely. What I'm saying is, if you guys remember in 2005, the Katrina and Rita hit South Florida, Southeast Florida, and then kept going and then hooked up. And that kind of is more or less what it almost looks like this system wants to do, just kind of follow a track like that. And that would make sense with our upper level steering, because we're still going to have troughing over the west coast. We're going to have our anticyclone fueling the gyre. So our path of least resistance is going to be more or less like that. So right over here, you can see big old ridge, big old anticyclone, and we have the trough over western Conus. So there's your path of least resistance right in through there. That's where it is more than likely going to track without really looking too heavily at the pattern. We can switch over to our 850 millibar. You see it a little bit better here. Let's go back in time a little bit. There it is. The EPS is picking up that vorticity area, moves it over Florida, and then up towards New Orleans. So you can see, even right here, there's your path. It's like I said, this is a very easy forecast, guys. Really no question about it. I'm not saying that, from a negative stance. It's just, it's a good thing. It's a good thing because we can track this 1,000 miles away if we wanted to. There's your high pressure. You look at the contour gradient pattern, your path of least resistance is right there. It's exactly what it's going to do. It's going to go right in between that corridor. There's your funnel. So, classic East Coast Florida situation. Definitely not looking at anything really crazy, though, because don't forget, as much as we want this thing, well, okay, maybe not all of us, as much as a few of us out there, not myself included, want this thing to really intensify, it's going to have to do battle with some pretty decent dry air during its first initial stint. Look at that. It's going to have to close off fairly quickly if it wants to get out of that dry air and continue its west-northwest track. So that's going to be the kicker here. And with that dry air kind of smothering development initially, the first 24 hours we may see it try to wrap up. It won't be until it finally makes a run towards the Bahamas where it'll really finally get into that point where it'll start to strengthen. We're not going to see this thing rapidly intensify. This is not going to be an instance of rapid intensification. That's one of our favorite code names out there in YouTube hurricane season weather. Somebody in the chat said, let's take a look at precipitable water. Let's look down at the southeast United States and let's go to the 24-hour accumulated precip. See what kind of rainfall threat we have with this. Let's see. So honestly, that's pretty decent. That's pretty good. This is exactly what we need for northern Florida. That's exactly what we need. So this is actually a good thing, to tell you the truth. 24-hour precip, as that system moves ashore, whatever it is topping out somewhere between 2 to 5 inches of rain. Still enough, if it rains long enough, to create a little bit of urbanized flooding or urban flooding, roadway pooling, but not enough to where this is going to be a catastrophic event. So this is actually good news in my opinion. I almost want this to happen because this will definitely help to resuscitate a little bit of central and northern Florida that has been drying out during the early periphery of late spring, kind of approaching summer. We're almost into bona fide summer now. If I'm not mistaken, I think summer starts like in the early 20s of June, if I'm not mistaken, sometime between like June 20th, June 22nd, getting close to summertime. So yeah, that's looking pretty decent. I like those rainfall rates. Let me switch back over to the European model and see what we got there as well. Go to 12 Zulu, see what the Euro is thinking, 24-hour precip. Even better, optimal rain totals right there. So not a heck of a lot to worry about in terms of inland flooding. That's pretty awesome, to tell you the truth. That's a nice little nudge in terms of our overall precip accumulation to knock down some of the dryness out there, the drought and fire risk conditions for central and northern Florida. So that's a beautiful thing. I kind of hope that this is the solution here. Keeps us right at about 1 to 2.5 inches of rainfall within 24 hours. That's pretty decent. That's nothing to get a little concerned about or get scared about. You come over to the winds, and the winds are not all that crazy either. Right along the coastline, we could try to make a run for a tropical storm strength, it looks like, right here on the European model. The big thing we want to also take into consideration is that onshore flow. So storm surge could still be a bit of an issue. A little bit of storm surge, definitely some beach erosion for sure, because we have to take into account we have a gnarly ridge, a gnarly high pressure to the north here. And then we have our pressure gradient around our low pressure down here to the south. I'll change the ink color one more time so you guys are picking up what I'm putting down. Right in through there is going to be more or less like a wind tunnel. Definitely going to be a wind tunnel. So even if this thing is very weak, even if it doesn't make it to named storm status, we're still going to have very, very decent onshore flow, amping up our tides, our waves, our swells. Definitely not a time where you want to be out on the beach or out on the water on a boat, especially a smaller fishing boat or a smaller little dinghy. I don't really think we'll see a lot of storm surge, but we could see a little bit of sea level rise, especially with all that water trying to be pressed right up against the shore. It could be a Nicole situation where we do see a lot of beach erosion up the east coastline of Florida from the Jacksonville area all the way down towards the Space Coast. That would probably be the number one risk here. With as modest of a system as this is, I'm not going to say weak, because every tropical system is built to its own accord. It's a unique entity in of itself. But for as modest of a storm as we have here, I think the number one risk is going to be just right up along the coast. That onshore push of winds could knock some things over, could create a little bit of inland flooding just off the coastline of the beach areas, and then obviously the sand dunes and all that are going to take some hefty erosion if this thing does come in. So, yeah, we'll definitely have to watch. It seems like we're zeroed in on the Thursday-Friday time frame. Thursday-Friday. Let me see if the European AI model... No, the AI European model has not come in yet. Euro AI model is not really sniffing too much out of it, just kind of like an inverted trough running along the backside of that high pressure, the southern region of that high pressure. The AI model is still thinking we could get 1 or 2 storms. It looks like that second storm, the European AI, is really not doing a whole lot with it. Another area that I'm watching, since we have a ton of people tuning in tonight, I just want to plug in our Lesser Antilles out there. I'm noticing that the European model is really trying to slowly but surely push some more robust waves into the Windward Islands. If you notice, we're starting to see more concentrations of moisture moving through the pattern as these things trek west-northwest off Africa through the ITCZ up towards the Lesser Antilles, particularly the Leeward Islands. So we got to keep watching down here for not anything certain, anything imminent, but rain chances and tropical activity going up. This is going to be an area that we really want to monitor. And then the Bay of Campeche is not out of the question. We finally bounced back. This morning at 0Z, things were backing off, but we have bounced back since then. Not the southeastern United States. I wanted the western Atlantic AOI. If you look at the Canadian model, for example, still showing a 1-2 punch right there, and then a second one coming up right there. The GFS is back on board with that, if I'm not mistaken. There's numero uno, and then there's numero dos right there. No phantom storms this time, ironically. For a happy hour GFS, we don't have any phantom storms. And I'm not calling that second system a phantom storm because it happens early enough in the run, and a lot of our other models are capturing it as well. So, not going to call that a phantom storm. What's really cool, though, is if you look, we have simultaneous impacts here and here. So, could be a very active southern United States, southeastern United States, several days, late next week into next weekend. Got some really good tropical energy pushing in with the gyre over Texas, Mexico, and then whatever the heck that thing decides to spawn into for the Bahamas and Florida here. But I think a Florida impact is kind of written on the wall at this point. Not cemented just yet. It's still wet cement, hypothetically speaking, but it's definitely trying to do something. It's 9:45, so we have our 18Z ensembles here. Let's see. Yeah, so the GFS is not vibing with it too much, but still definitely vibing with it. Not a whole lot in terms of ensemble support for the Greater Atlantic. What else did I want to look at? There's something else I like to look at on here, and I completely forgot what it was. The precipitate water control from the GFS. See what that is calling for. Yeah, calling for a fairly compact storm busting into Florida, Georgia. Some very interesting stuff. Very interesting stuff. Yeah. Well, all right, guys. That's all she wrote. A little bit of an abbreviated live stream. I wanted to get this out into open air to talk with you guys and get some information on board so we know exactly what it is we're looking at and see exactly what takes shape. We have a couple days where I think tomorrow and Monday are going to be extremely telling. If we wake up tomorrow and things have gone all the way back to the cold side of the spectrum, then let's not get our hopes up. But if we continue to hold consistency as we move along through time, that's when things could get just a little bit more exciting. And not exciting as in woo, but, just we have something to track and our confidence can definitely go up. Let's take a look at the wave heights. I've got a couple questions in the chat talking wave heights. This I don't think is going to get us far enough out there to take a look at them. Let's see, does 12Z go out a little bit further in time? No, it does not. Let's see. What about down to the maximum wave height and direction? Does this go all the way out? Nope, this is a 90-hour run once again. Let's go to the GFS on tropical tidbits. Go to the southeast United States. Where are they? Significant wave height. So this is a fairly compact feature, so right about where it does decide to push in, we could see some pretty decent wave heights with that onshore flow. It looks like the general average here is going to be right around that 10 to 15 mark, closer to whatever it is that it decides to consolidate into. I'm kind of being very vague with my terminologies here. If this consolidates and closes down, then we could see wave heights get a little bit higher on that northern side of it. This does seem to be a northerly loaded storm. Your center would be, let me use a different color ink here. The center would be somewhere down here, so definitely a north side loaded storm. So anyone to the north of this feature is going to get the worst of the coastal impacts. Obviously, it goes without saying that the cyclonic circulation, anything to the south, is going to be dealing with offshore flow until it kind of can progress far enough back on this direction for that wind to wrap back around on the backside of it and fill in that low pressure gap. Because high pressure flows to low pressure, so as that cyclone continues to churn and move off in whatever direction it does, if we take this northerly escape route or the southerly escape route, it'll be once the system gets on the west side of Florida where we finally get that return flow on the back side of it. So in the immediate front end and the middle point, if you will, north side loaded system for sure. And that's also another key feature here that I want you guys to take note of. The models are definitely thinking there's not going to be a ton of wind shear. For this thing to be as symmetrical as it is, to be almost a perfect circle in nature, right there. Not a lot of wind shear. Definitely a bit more of an optimal system than what we've seen so far. I know it's only June 15th. We're literally right at the halfway mark of June. But in comparison to the invests and the interest areas that we've had, a little bit of a neater system. Small. Very small. It's like a little ping pong ball or a pinball as opposed to a bowling ball like some of these other features we've seen in the past. Definitely more on the lines of like a little marble or a ping pong ball in comparison to others, but fairly symmetrical. Sometimes these smaller systems are a little more treacherous than the bigger ones. Charlie was a very excellent example. Andrew was another excellent example. Andrew is a very compact Category 5 and wreaked havoc on southern Florida. So sometimes these smaller systems are a force to be reckoned with. They don't bring a lot of hellacious impacts, especially since these smaller systems are typically moving a little bit faster, but they're still, it's the nature of the beast. They're still interesting to watch and interesting to track down. Isaac Logan, a very good question. Yes, I do think so. I do think so, as a matter of fact. If we switch out to our big old North Atlantic AOI and we talk steering for a little bit, there's been a lot of hubbub on the X, the Twitter weather sphere, the weather sphere in general, that during the peak hurricane season, August, September, and October, we're looking at a pretty broad ridge out here, and then actually some anomalous ridging up here. So our 500 millibar heights, the general trend, obviously we want to wait and see. We don't want to call it that early, but there have been some indications that we could see a fairly decent, let me close this ink out, that's too big. We could see some pretty good 500 millibar ridging out here, and then some 500 millibar ridging up and through here, that negative PNA. So yeah, East Coast Florida, Mid-Atlantic region, kind of like what we've been talking about on this channel. Could definitely be in the ballpark for seeing this happening again and again like so, with our Caribbean runners possibly moving up like so. I think it's going to be early and late season, and whatever decides to develop out here in the Caribbean that are going to put Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi and Alabama, maybe more so Louisiana and Texas at risk if we get some development down here. A lot of the stuff that forms out here I really do think is going to be a Biloxi to Florida and Mid-Atlantic coast issue. General trend, I really do think so. But we'll see. We'll definitely see. I have plans to go to Playa del Carmen next Tuesday. Should I postpone my plan? Give me a heads up on where Playa del Carmen is. I've heard the name before, but geographically speaking, can't visualize it on a map. South Florida is in the clear, more or less. Yeah, definitely. I would say South Florida is in the clear, unless this thing stays fairly weak. It's another thing, too. If this thing doesn't organize whatsoever, then it will probably take a bit more of a southern path. But then Randall, at that point, you're just looking at rain. You're just looking at a normal day in South Florida. So if it does end up working its way down towards the south, we're probably not going to get anything out of it. No more than this yellow blip that's on National Hurricane Center's homepage. Mick and Marley, thank you very much for tuning in. I shouted you out a little bit ago for sure with a good old nudge. Talking tropics here, but I do appreciate that. Yes, guys, for all you guys tuning in, I got a little shade thrown at me earlier last week, and I think the week before that, for talking about this weird thing showing up in our models just to the northeast of the Bahamas, and that escalated quickly, to channel my inner Ron Burgundy to you guys. Definitely escalated quickly. So now we have something to track, and this seems a little bit more of a believable end result than even our gyre and our Caribbean right now, so definitely worth watching. Oh yeah, Edwards, Kissimmee, Florida will definitely be safe. That's in the general area where I am. I'm just outside of Kissimmee in Haines City, Polk County, just right along that Polk-Osceola County line. But yeah, Kissimmee here, we're going to be just fine. Like I said, guys, at the end of the day, this is only likely to be a tropical storm. Our ceiling here is maybe a 50-some-odd mile an hour tropical storm. If it gets stronger than that, that'd be very impressive. But if I had to give you a realistic forecast at the top of the threshold, obviously there's a floor to this, that nothing happens. We got a lot of dry air out there. There are some pretty favorable ingredients, but we do still have things trying to work against it. So floor, obviously, nothing happens. Ceiling, I'm thinking mid-grade, solid tropical storm. 50, 55 mile an hour named storm is where I'd put my limit, with stronger gusts, obviously. We're talking sustained winds. And it may seem like it's a little bit on the stronger side just because of the gradient force out here. Pretty wonderful gradient. If I switch over to actually, I'll just leave it right here, and we'll switch over to our MSLP anomaly. Look at that gradient there. Very weak system. Nothing to really worry about. Nowhere near a retiring major hurricane, but just look at these erroneous high pressure values right up to the immediate north, smothering the mid-Atlantic, the northeast, and then look at that small little that little ball of low pressure. So right to that north side is where we're going to see a really good corridor of easterly winds. So it could still feel a little sporty, even if it is just a disorganized mess of tropical energy. Still going to be a fairly windy day along the coastline. Still going to get some beach erosion. Could still see some spinning up of funnel clouds. Bonafide pre-feeder band activity like we see. If I had to put my money on it, I would definitely think coastal impacts and the tornado risk are going to probably be the biggest issue here. And when I say tornado risk, I'm not talking like a level 5 out of 5 SPC. I'm just saying, if we really had to break it down, winds are going to not really be an issue. They're going to be a non-issue. Just make sure you have loose items outside secured, especially if you live on the coastline. Don't go in the water. Rip currents are going to be a thing. Beach erosion is going to be a thing. Might see some coastal flooding if this thing does strengthen up. Inland threats, maybe some localized flooding if this thing can flare up enough thunderstorm activity. But primarily within those rotating bands, you got that tornado risk. When AL90 was moving through, we had a couple of tornado warnings in South Florida with a confirmed tornado touchdown, according to Chief Meteorologist Matt Devitt out there in Wink News in Southwest Florida. So even with that disorganized disturbance, we saw a tornado out of it. So we don't want to rule out that risk. That tornado risk is definitely going to be present. Let's see, not enough. We were in such a deficit. Yeah, anything on South Carolina impacts? I'm not seeing anything for South Carolina. You look at this right here. South Carolina is going to have that protective high-pressure blister right over it. I'm thinking that if anything, it could come ashore as far north as the Georgia-Florida state line, down as far south as the Boca Raton, Fort Lauderdale area. So, and Life of Chai, when are you going again? I missed your comment. I missed the time frame in the comment there. Let me go back up a little bit. Next Tuesday, this upcoming Tuesday or the following Tuesday? Like, are we talking June 25th? Or are we talking this upcoming Tuesday here in a few days? Because either way, I mean, you're not looking too bad. Just be prepared for some rainy and wet days, that's for sure, because that gyre has a ton of moisture out there with it. Central America is just being inundated by the rainfall. Look at that. Mr. McCormick. Retired Master Sergeant McCormick, Master Sergeant Mac, if you're watching, sir, shout out to you. I've been talking to him the last couple of days. One of my old mentors and one of my old flight chiefs from Air Force Weather is out there in the Yucatan right now, and he was mentioning that it's just been very wet, lots of rainfall, lots of wind, and at least cooler temps in comparison to Arizona. So there's one positive, but yeah, very rough out there. I wouldn't say cancel the plans, that's for sure. I wouldn't go as far as to say cancel, but I mean, at least consider if you have that wiggle room, maybe adjust. Just so that way you can go out there and make the best of it, Because I'm all for cruising and traveling, even if there's a little rainfall, you can still make the best of it, especially if you're out cruising or you got a nice resort you're staying at. But at the same time, if you're looking to get into the excursions and go sightseeing and head out and about with the family, then I would maybe, if you got your travel insurance, look around and see if you can make a little bit of an adjustment. Just so that way you can get under some more favorable weather. Mike, when will we see something starting to form? If it does, about Tuesday, Wednesday, sir. About Tuesday, Wednesday is when we're looking at something trying to manifest itself. You look at the 18Z GFS, looking at lower pressure right there as early as Monday morning, and then Tuesday, game time, could possibly be out there. So we only have a couple of days to get ahead of this. If we switch over to the European model, the 18 Zulu European model, there's Tuesday, and then there's Wednesday. A little area low pressure starting to get going there. So again, we'll have to see what we wake up to. 0Z is going to be a big determinant. Everything was fired up at 12 Zulu, but we'll have to see now. We got to remember, as much as we want to get excited or hype or whatever, we got to remember we have our first designation from National Hurricane Center. We only have a little bit of data on this. We only have a couple model runs, two model runs of the GFS, couple model runs of the European model. We'll have to see what we wake up to at 0 Zulu. I might stay up and wait to see what those models look like, even though my buddy Gabriel and I are going to be working out first thing tomorrow morning. So maybe I won't. Maybe I'll just wait until the 5 a.m. hour and see what 0Z shows. But that'll be a true testament, guys. Sometimes these 12 and 0Z model runs, they'll get very excited and they'll pop off, whoa, major hurricane, and then at 12 Zulu or vice versa, nothing. For example, excellent example here, I'll show you right now, and I'm not trying to squash anybody's excitement. If there is any excitement in the chat, especially for some good old rain out there in Florida, not trying to squash, I'm just trying to be realistic. If we go back to 0Z, for example, here, and we look down there in the Gulf of Mexico, look at that. nothing, just broad area of low pressure. And then all of a sudden you go back to 12 Zulu for the European model, and then bam, we got one tropical storm and then another tropical storm right there. So sometimes these models are night and day, night and day. So when we wake up tomorrow morning and we all take a look at our 0Z data, we'll get a bit of a better feel for it. If we see some pretty consistent echoes at 0Z, it's worth looking into as we get into the new week. If all of a sudden our models just shut down and there's nothing on there, then, well, another ghost of the hurricane season, I guess you could say. So, Mick and Marley, Skittles McDiddles, tonight was definitely an off-chart, off-the-cuff live stream. This is not an ordinary live stream. And for those of you curious, since we're still watching, this is the type of live stream that I told you guys before the hurricane season starts that we can only go up. Our normal live streams are always Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Sometimes I have to do them in the evening because my mornings are booked up. Most of the time, I aim to have them at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Tonight was just a wonderful example that I'm a man of my word for you guys, and I wanted to talk to you all. And I told you, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we can only up the content. We won't have any less than that. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday are our staples. If there's things to talk about, we'll only increase coverage. So, yeah, I did actually. As a matter of fact, these are the 18 Zulu ensembles from the European model right here. Pretty decent support, as a matter of fact. If we switch over to weather models, I think weather models kind of biases out the very weak ensemble members here. Let me see if they're actually here yet. I don't think they're here. Oh, no, yeah, they're here. Let's see. Yeah, there they go. So, biasing out a lot of those weaker ensemble members. This one starts at less than 1,005 millibars. So, a little bit of a undertone here. You can see at 12 Zulu, we had a little bit more model agreement that a low-end tropical depression, tropical storm maybe trying to sneak in there. And then the big kicker here where our tropical depression probability is going up. That's our highest signal we've seen so far, smothering the state of Florida. So yeah, tonight was a surprise live stream. If anything big pops up, if we continue to see stuff coming up, incrementally increasing, we may try to squeak in a live stream tomorrow. We may, but if not, first thing on Monday, we're going to be going live again. First thing on Monday, we'll be going live. So remember, guys, if you want to take note of it, make sure your notifications are turned on. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday are going to be our textbook live streams. And if there's anything going on, we're just going to increase coverage from there, and we're going to talk about it. That's why we're live right now. I'm never live at 10 p.m. I'm ready to go to bed, to tell you the truth. It's been a long day, and tomorrow's going to be a long day. But like I said, I did not want to leave you guys hanging here. It was definitely worth tuning in and talking to you guys and getting it all out there into open air. Now, hopefully we didn't jinx it and we wake up tomorrow, there's going to be nothing out there, because that's definitely what's been happening. Thanks as always, Dave, for the updates. Hope everyone has a good night. By the way, happy Father's Day to any dad. Yes, happy Father's Day out there, everybody, for sure. Happy Father's Day, and I hope you guys still enjoy the holiday tomorrow, and you guys had enjoyed today as well, despite all the rigmarole that's going on in the weather sphere. I'm always excited for a little stormy weather. Perfect, thank you. And for a surprise live stream, glad I caught you. Now, Sharon Jackson, it's always great to see you guys in the chat. Storm962, Life of Chai, you're very welcome, guys. We're going to go ahead and wrap up the live stream. I said a half an hour, and here we are an hour again. So I'm going to jump off the stream and get ready to call it a night, and we will see what happens in the morning. Either we're all going to look silly, and I'm going to look like a fearmonger when we wake up and there's nothing there, or we might be onto something. So we'll see. I'm willing to say that on the stream here. I'm showing you guys the charts. If this stuff suddenly in the morning, then well, I guess I'm hyping up. Nothing's gonna happen. So we'll see. This hurricane season has been off to a very weird start. This puppy here came entirely out of left field. So who knows what we're gonna wake up to. It is nice to see that our models are slowly but surely kind of building things up. South Florida going to get a tropical storm. So we're still up in the air, Jess, as to whether this will be an organized named storm, and there's a large margin of error between it being a Jacksonville, Florida, Georgia border kind of impact, or down there towards the Boca Raton, Fort Lauderdale area. We're still in a holding pattern. We're not gonna have to hold for very long. We only have about 48 hours before something starts to manifest itself. So check back with me if you'd like within 24, 36 hours if you'd like to drop a new comment on this live stream so I see it, or if you have the means of reaching out to me on another social media platform, Instagram, TikTok, X, feel free to shoot me a message privately or leave me a comment privately on another social media, and I'm happy to answer your question. And that goes for all you guys in the chat as well. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, drop them in the comment section at the bottom portion of this live stream, or leave me a private message or a private comment on my other social media platforms, Instagram, X, TikTok, all the same username, Weather Center Nazario, Weather Center _ Nazario, depending on the platform. But either way, Weather Center Nazario, WX Center Nazario, you'll be able to find me 100% of the time. And I'm very open to comments, questions, and concerns. I always make it a point to get back to you guys, even if I'm out and about, traveling, or taking care of business elsewhere off the Weather Center. But yeah, guys, definitely an area to investigate. Nothing to get alarmed about, nothing to freak out about, nothing to go crazy about. We're still up in the air. Confidence is low, but it's building. That's the key takeaway here, and the fact that it's headed towards a major population area, that's another reason it's worth getting out there. So we possibly have 3 entities we got to keep an eye on. First BOC, Bahamas and Florida. Second BOC. So got a decent little bit of stuff to investigate until we're out of the month of June. And then who's to say what's coming up next? We'll definitely see. Pardon me. But guys, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Saturday night, whatever it is you may be getting into. For our youngins out there, Saturday night is still young, still early. For us old folks, we're going to get ready to crash out. Got to get a lift in the morning before church, and then more Father's Day shenanigans, and we'll see exactly what the weather has in store for us. As Bear in the Big Blue House says, I wonder what the weather has in store for me today. And, you know, that's exactly what it's going to be like when we walk into the Weather Center tomorrow morning, or when I'm sitting there. I be doing that too. When I wake up first thing in the morning, I be sitting there with my eyes like barely open, looking like, oh, what do the charts say? So that's exactly, if you guys want that image, when I wake up tomorrow morning, I'm going to be sitting there like, I got to look at the charts real quick. What do we got out there? What do we got out there? And if anything pops up and be like, there we go, it's time to talk. But, yeah, guys, that's all she wrote. A huge, sincere thank you to all the viewers we had this evening. This has been our best live stream since last hurricane season. And Lord willing, this is what I love to see, the community growing. The conversation has been awesome in the chat. I love everyone talking and communicating, answering questions. Moderators, it's a pleasure to have you guys in the chat. All my faithful and long-term viewers, awesome to have you along for the ride. And if we do get something coming, you best believe we're going to be suited up and ready to rock and roll for our first tropical intercept of the hurricane season. So if things do come together and we go live tomorrow, if not Monday, we're also going to start speculating on what the plan of attack is to get ourselves in the path of this tropical cyclone, is what we'll call it. So TRG Tornado, One Nation Weather, thank you both for joining in tonight. I know you guys have your own channels to manage and work on. It means the world to me to have you guys in the chat, supporting the live streams. I love it. I love to see it. I love the collaboration. That's what it's all about at the end of the day. I'm a firm believer on collaboration and working together. New viewers, anybody out there, wherever it is you're tuning in from, if you just wanted an interesting conversation to follow tonight, or if you're in the path of whatever this possibly could be, whether it be in Mexico, Texas, Louisiana, Florida, Bahamas, thank you very much for tuning in. I hope I gave you the information you were looking for, and I hope you come back for more here very soon, and we'll see you next time, guys. Have a wonderful rest of your Saturday. Happy Father's Day to everybody out there. Once again, fathers far and wide, soon-to-be fathers and grandfathers, great-grandfathers. Everybody out there, no discrimination there, no limitation or anything else you want to talk about it. And yeah, that's all she wrote. I'm kind of sad to end the live stream. This has been one of our more amped up, positive, cool discussion live streams. But thank you guys again. It's been an absolute pleasure. Couldn't imagine spending the rest of my Saturday night doing anything else. I mean, I could, but it's always awesome to be sitting down and talking weather with everybody. So we'll see you again very soon. That's a promise. But until then, this is Weather Center Nazario. signing out.